And hey, everybody, welcome back to ESI Digital. I'm Annie Pay. I'm a producer for CNBC and producer for the FTW with the ModCon podcast. So, we are in the last hours of the ESI Digital Conference, and we've spent a whole week kind of taking stock of where the industry's at. But along with that, a big part of this conference is to figure out what's ahead for esports and what's ahead in the future, and to answer all of your burning questions about what might be coming down the line. And that brings us to Valorant. It's one of the hottest games of the year. It's one of the most talked about games of the year. And obviously, as a result, there's a lot of questions about the competitive scene and how it's going to evolve down the line, especially for Riot Games. So, to answer all of those questions, I've got a star studded panel ready to take all of them. They're going to intro themselves one by one. Let's begin with Alex.
Hey everyone, I'm Alex Vansilli Nguyen. I've been broadcasting video games for multiple games, but mainly around Counter-Strike, the franchise, since 2002, and now hopping into Valorant since it came out.
Hey
Tyler.
guys, I'm Tyler. Oh hey, I'm Tyler FionnOnFire Erzberger. I work for ESPN.com. I've been at the website and the company since 2016. I've been in esports journalism for over a decade, and for the last half decade, I have been covering extensively Riot Games' other giant esport, the biggest esport in the world, League of Legends. So Valorant is nothing new to me, but it's also new at the same time. So this will be fun.
Right,
And Dan.
I'm DDK, and I'm a commentator, most known for Counter-Strike, and these days Valorant as well. And I've been broadcasting for the last 8 years, and before that, I was a professional player. So the last couple of decades, I've been pretty deep into esports.
And we've got Jordan.
Good to see you. Good to see everybody. Yep, Jordan Gilbert here. How's it going, guys? Counter-Strike player. Known a lot of these guys, well, specifically Alex and Dan for a long time from the Counter-Strike scene. Anyways, yeah, been competing professionally since 2008. Evil Geniuses, Cloud9, most notably recently, Complexity. Playing a lot of Valorant these days on stream, mostly on Twitch, upload YouTube videos, dance around the industry, CS Pro Players Association. I think I'll end it there. Looking forward to chatting with you guys.
And on that note, so let's kind of take stock right now of where Valorant's at. We're a few months right into the game's official release. There's obviously been a lot of hype about it. We've seen players jump over to it, right? New teams being formed, new tournaments, new events popping up. So Alex, I'm going to kick this over to you first. So where do you think we are in terms of the evolution of Valorant's scene?
Yeah, I think it's nice to see where we are so far, to actually touch base to where we were before, where it first started, and how Riot, basically, I have to commend them on how good of a job they did. Basically, for non-endemic brands that want to know about Valorant and know about Riot, I think they did a great job in terms of marketing the game. When we looked at the beta days back in April, we had actually top streamers with Twitch-enabled drops that allowed a lot of viewers, maybe like the 10 to hundreds of thousands of viewers actually at a time, trying to get a drop, trying to get a key, and just get their hands to play the game. And I think following that, you had a great job from Twitch Rivals too, where even the Jordan even had a match versus the developers, and it gave a showcase of the opportunities of what it's like to play a team-based game like Valorant that's going to be different than what we know from other tactical shooters, which is nice to experience. Then you get into the beta mode. We already had tournaments going through, and once the game came out, then we just saw like a lot of battles between which one is the best game, or coming from Apex or Overwatch or Counter Strike. Which one is the best pool of players that could actually play super well in Valorant? And so far, the debate has always been won by Counter Strike. But when you look at it today, the debate is still: is it still going to be the Counter Strike team? Because you look at top teams, for example, like Sentinels now, that kind of have a mix of different players from Overwatch, from Apex, and also from Counter Strike, that are actually one of the top North American teams now. So that debate is still there, and then the hype continues on, as because of the poor timing of what's going with the pandemic and COVID-19. Now the big debate is which one's the best team in the world too. So is it going to be North America? Is it going to be G2 of Europe? Is it going to be the Jupiter of Japan? And that's what we're all waiting for right now. So the hype continues on, and I think it's going to be debated on for at least a good amount of 6 months to a year. because also the game continues to change in terms of evolving in the meta too.
Yeah, I think it's for me been really interesting to see the pro scene develop because there's so much, as you say, to compare it to. And I think one of the interesting things that Riot did with this game to try to have it be successful and solve some of the problems that that Counter Strike has, which is kind of the MMA problem, where we have this amazing game, loads of people love the gameplay, it's super compelling to watch, but at its core, historically, it's kind of terrorist versus terrorist. It's hard to market that. It's hard to get sponsorship and money kind of coming in to fund that. So it's like the MMA issue, and I think Riot tried to solve this, and they're doing this pretty effectively by renaming some of the things. Like it's not called the bomb, it's called the spike. It's not terrorists or
Mhm.
counter-terrorists. It's just attackers and defenders. So it's very neutral in that sense. And the way that they have approached, I think, the graphics as well is very appealing, not just to the European audiences, but also the Asian audiences. And the Asian audience in Counter-Strike was one that was, I think, fairly difficult to capture. There's a lot of competition there. I think Riot are uniquely positioned to do something that Counter-Strike couldn't, which is to capture the Asian audience, which is such a huge market. And that has huge implications, I think, like Vansilli was saying, on competition, how compelling the competition can be throughout the entire, well, all of the regions around the world. Because, in Counter Strike, we're kind of used to just the battle between Europe and North America mostly, all
Yeah.
the most elite teams. But moving into Valorant, it looks like it should be a truly global tactical FPS esport. And that's very exciting.
Are we doing order here? Can I chime in?
Okay.
Go
Yeah,
for
of
it,
course.
I wasn't sure if it's the order I saw, so I was like, is this the same thing? I think too, to Dan's point, what's really cool is what they're doing is on that outward front, right, and making it more presentable and marketable in that sense. And then, on the flip side of CSGO, another thing they've struggled with is interacting with the community well and creating this like defensible product that they're like, okay, we're not just like, yeah, it's awesome that Valve and CS:GO has created such an organic like evangelism, but in the sense of a game, when you're building a new community, that transparency and discussion of, hey, we're updating this and this is our thought process, and doing that from the start of the game and the inception of everything, and getting that kind of dialogue going, I think is only going to strengthen their numbers. Since I'm such a strong CS:GO fan and supporter and pro player, I almost like kind of like shrug off the questions in my chat constantly because it's like, oh, CS:GO or Valorant. It's kind of just like, to me, it's a little obnoxious because it's like they can definitely coexist. Obviously, Valorant ported over a lot of the concepts of CS:GO. They definitely did some new things cool with the way the buy menu works and the way kind of the whole matchmaking works. They have better matchmaking servers and little things like that with the UI. That's awesome. But I think it's really cool from what Dan's saying, how they're making the game easier to market from a mainstream perspective, and then they're also interacting with the community in a really strong sense. And I think that's creating a really strong foundation for them.
Yeah, I actually agree wholeheartedly on that. And I interviewed the game directors a lot leading up to the launch of the game, and this is not a CS, Counter Strike, or Apex Legends, or Overwatch versus Valorant. They didn't want that. They just wanted to make the best game possible. Valorant really, to an extent, is a homage to Counter Strike 1.6. These guys and these women grew up with that game and loved it so much that they wanted to take the gunplay and a lot of the foundation that Counter Strike has built over the years, because they truly believe that is the best gunplay in FPS is Counter Strike. Is why it's so closely modeled to it. It's why the operator is compared to the op in Counter Strike. Like, they're not hiding the fact that they love Counter Strike. This is an homage to Counter Strike. Difference with Valorant is they want to make a sandbox. They want to bring in these crazy, wild elements to make the game more unpredictable. It's less about pure aim. It's less about very set tactics, and they want it to be, as their tagline says, defy the limits. They want wild characters. They want wild abilities. They want people to be able to shoot up in the air like Jet, do 360 dagger kills, and really they want there's an homage definitely to the gunplay of Counter Strike, but the two games, when it really comes down to it, are quite different overall viewing experiences. That's another thing about Valorant too, is that it's such in a fledgling state right now where it's so far off from what it could be as a finished product, just from the spectator mode that has, when it first released a few months ago, the spectator mode was absolute trash. And I've said this to the developers to their face. It was trash. It was very bad, and they agreed with me. I mean, there was a point where when an agent died in the game, they would X out. The picture would just become Phoenix's face, which made no sense at all. It was very, really, really floppy and not very fun to watch. But from patch to patch to patch, they have fixed the spectator mode, made it more enjoyable. It's now more fun to watch as esport. So the great thing about Valorant is that right now it's nowhere close to CSGO. It's not close to these polished games, but there is so much potential in this game, and that Riot's done such a good job kind of building this foundation up that sky's the limit. And especially when they are the creators of the number one esport in the world, where last year over 100 million people tuned in to watch the grand final of the League of Legends World Championship in Paris. If you're going to trust one company to build a successful esport, it's going to be Riot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And sorry, just to tie into what Tyler is saying too, and to Jordan, and even to Dan, because I think when we're looking at mechanical skills, if we want to compare it from like CS:GO to Valorant, for example, Jordan being a pro in Counter Strike for 8 years at least, I think what drew him into Valorant was, it's very similar in terms of like the AD movement. If you guys know about that, it's like the how to peek, how to be accurate on your first shot. I think that mechanical skill is very predominant, at least in my opinion, that really attracts a high pool of Counter Strike players into Valorant. But I think a nice big difference that we have between Valorant and CS:GO is that CS:GO, why people love it and why it's been installed in installment for 20 years now and been a popular esport for 20 years is because the level of skills continues to grow from player to player. um, there's always new ways that they could do movements or get into certain spots in a map that makes them become that number one player. And the maps is what changes a lot too. I think in CS:GO versus Valorant, as we see so far, there's always development of maps that kind of change the era and change the meta of the game. For as Valorant, we see a lot of agent being launched, or at least that's the plan, right? Less maps, more agents. And agents themselves is that difference from CS:GO, where that's going to change the meta. Like the shooting is going to be very similar, but the way that you approach a map, approach a strategy, it adds a lot more color, I guess, into the storylines of the teams. Why are they going to switch from a certain composition to a later composition, just like we see in League of Legends? And from a commentator's perspective, I kind of like that. You still have that storyline of a clutch situation, like a 3 versus 1, that you could still hype up like you could do in Counter Strike, but at the same time, seeing new agents coming into the game and how that's going to spice up the strategy for a team, that's very exciting for the esports as a whole. And I think when we're looking at League of Legends and even Dota, in the past, they're doing a good job of like, for example, putting sponsors into the maps and stuff like that too, of like developing their maps. And I don't think that's something that's going to be unfamiliar for Valorant. I think once we get to a point where it's established, where we kind of have, I don't know if it's going to be a circuit or if it's going to be a franchise, but once we get there, I think it's going to give a good opportunity for investors and sponsors to really get in behind this game because of the popularity of the game already with the player pool, and at the same time being able to plaster basically your sponsorship logo into certain maps at certain areas where it won't hinder the game.
I think just to I think a lot of these points kind of tie into each other, but I wanted to add something from a broadcast perspective, given sort of all of the talk about the evolution of the game and some of the differences in just or highlighting some of the differences in the spectator experience, because I think this is something that's really interesting and was, I think, until somewhat recently felt still quite unproven how compelling of an esports spectator experience can Valorant really be. And I think in the recent FaZe Invitational tournament, we had effectively the two best North American teams facing off against each other, and in two series in the upper bracket, the winners match there, as well as the grand finals where these teams both met, Sentinels and TSM. It was extremely compelling, and everyone's on the edge of their seats. And as a commentator, because I got to commentate one of those series with Sean Gares, we found that this game, it's so intense. Counter-Strike has a lot more breaks, but Valorant's also designed to be shorter because it has less overall rounds and the way the overtime system works as well. So you get more predictable match times, which is an important consideration in terms of programming, because programming Counter-Strike is almost impossible, it feels like, especially with any mainstream consideration. Getting it on TV, for example, feels so difficult because you just never, is it going to be 2 hours or 6 hours? Like, it can really range massively, but it feels like not only is Valorant more predictable in terms of the time frames, the way that it's been set up from, let's say, instead of having a freeze time in Counter-Strike and where everyone's just frozen in place at the beginning, in Valorant, something is always happening. At the very beginning of a round, the first 20 seconds, you get to see what the team is trying to do. There's always like a build of suspension and anticipation from start to finish. So if you do get a compelling series, and we have it kind of proven now that exists and can exist, it's actually very exciting and a very different viewing experience. Kind of like Jordan was saying earlier, like they're two different beasts completely. And it's so that's, for me, was astounding to see. And I think people got a bit of a wake up call when they saw that series.
Yeah, and so kind of looking forward, right? We've really established, we've touched a little bit on the road ahead, and kind of the current state of the game as well. So I think kind of going forward, and this ties in very well with a viewer question that actually we just got, kind of looking ahead to how the Valorant esports scene is going to develop, right? Obviously there have been a lot of questions about, Riot's role, right, and how this is really going to shape out. And so one of our viewers asks, well, devs in esports, they have different strategies, right, for supporting their esports scenes. So what would be the best strategy, right, for Riot and Valorant? And so I think what I want to do right now is more explicitly lay out, how exactly, Riot has kind of played into the Valorant esports scene for now, and kind of what they can do later on. I mean, remember, they also took a few years for to really build up the League of Legends scene, but obviously we're in a totally different environment too in the esports industry. Alex, wondering if we could start with you and kick that around as well.
Sure, definitely. I think Riot, we already saw it again because we're in an industry right now where everything is brought back to online, back to our roots. It's nice to see that Riot has been involved with the Ignition series. So working in conjunction in partnership with big organizers, sorry, to be able to invite the top teams, the top teams in North America, in Europe, and even now in Asia, so they compete against each other, so that they're able to at least build a fan base around the game already. So when you're actually looking at, for example, a team such as TSM, they're always going to bring at least 8,000 viewers with them into a match. And 80% of those viewers are going to be following Wardell every single time when he's streaming day by day. So that the fan base is they're doing a great job for that, for supporting these competitions and labeling them as the Ignition series, so that you could actually bring in more endemic sponsors too. Because, for example, I think the FaZe Invitational already had Nissan in there. We have so that was, and T1 Mobile I think was in that as well. So it's nice to see that you have already that involvement from those investors. I think where it's going to go, if I'm not mistaken, from when League of Legends first came out too, they kind of had like this third-party circuit where even we saw League of Legends at DreamHack, right? And Tyler, you
Yeah.
could actually correct me if I'm wrong, but we saw that.
You're right.
And yeah, so that gives a chance there for Riot, from Ignition series, from doing third-party tournaments with third-party organizers, to really test out the waters. Is it going to be more towards a CSGO type of circuit where it's always going to be traveling around the world with events, or is it going to be a franchise? But I think before they're able to get there first, I think it's building that map, building that plan. I think they already said in the first year or two it was going to go in that circuit type, so that we could hopefully see, like, for example, an ESL One or a DreamHack, or even a Flashpoint circuit for the game first, so that the fan base could continue on, and then from then on, I think the pitch comes in later to try to get those endemic and non-endemic sponsors into the scene, and see if they could grow it possibly into a league.
Yeah, Riot Games is
I
all about. Oh no, you go, Jordan.
Either way, yeah. I guess the thing I first think about when I think about them building up their scene was, first, what I mentioned earlier was the way they're kind of interacting with the community, the way they're building the game. That's like the first step, right? They build the attackers versus defenders. They build kind of the narrative. They obviously know they need to work on the spectator stuff and making it easier for broadcasting.
Mm-hmm.
They're building out the interaction with the community. And then, I think everyone expects them, hey, we're going to have this year to kind of see how the teams come together and what kind of things naturally and organically happen. And then I think everyone's expecting some form of like an LCS to get involved, but we're not quite sure yet. And, this is where maybe the journalist has some juicy kind of like hints he can maybe make in this section. But, this is where, the one thing I'm hoping for, and the problem that we saw in CSGO is we saw a little bit of oversaturation, well, a lot of it at different points, not a very clean schedule, and it made for disrupting narratives across the scene of, Dan speaks really well about, just watching one game and the microcosm of what one game can be. And that's the start of like what a great esports can be, is that tension and that buildup. And then if you extrapolate that out, what does that look like? That's the narrative and matches over the course of a season or a year. And so I think, if they can, the fact that I think the reason people are excited and think that Valorant can go somewhere and they're not really questioning it is because of that small excitement that exists when we play an in-house 10-man or when we watch a TSM versus Sentinels. We know that there's this similar excitement that we had when we first played Counter-Strike. And then I think when at a macro scale, we're just looking at making sure, hey, we don't want oversaturation. We want a clean schedule. We want nice time between events, but we want events, and we want things to be produced well and professionally from the get-go. And I think that's, one perspective of just the narrative is so key. And I think they have an opportunity to learn from CS in that sense from the get-go and make sure that Riot does a better job than Valve did initially of being like, hey, we're not just going to let it happen. I see why they did. That's a separate convo probably even, but it doesn't, it's going to be exciting if Valorant, and it seems like they want to kind of guide the scene a little bit more. It's more similar maybe that like Valve did to Dota.
Yeah, I actually can speak on this, is that the oversaturation is something that Riot's actually actively tried to fight against. And they're in a world where Riot was like, hey, everyone, host whatever Valorant tournament you want, put as much prize money into it. We'd have already seen huge tournaments already. I know there are significant tournament organizers, especially Flashpoint, which is hosting the next Exhibition Series tournament. They wanted to host tournaments way earlier than they are able to. But for Riot, they want to make everything spread out. They don't want it to be oversaturated. They don't want to get too ahead of the horse. They don't want to have this giant bubble of, $500,000 tournaments out of the gate. You get 50,000 viewer average and everything looks bad and everything topples down. So for Riot, everything's about organic growth. They want to see how the scene develops and they want to plan accordingly. There's no way they're not going to franchise if in 5 years or in 3 years the numbers support that they should franchise in various regions of the world. If that's what makes sense at the time, they're going to go with that. But we've seen that they have been very, very good, more so than any other company when it comes to esports, is to really listen and watch what their fans want and how much fans really care about their game as an esport. TFT, Teamfight Tactics, is a game that they came out last year. It's an auto battler game that came from Riot Games. And in the first month or two, it was bonkers numbers. There was huge viewership online. Everyone's playing the game. It would have been very easy for Riot to say, hey, let's make this the biggest esport. Let's make this a tier 1 esport, event after event. But they waited and they watched, and the numbers went down. And they are still doing World Championship, but they're doing it in much more a reasonable way. They're not trying to just ride the wave and try to make an esport from the initial hype, which we've seen before with Blizzard and Overwatch League, where when Overwatch was officially announced, they also announced that they were creating a professional league where teams would, where owners would buy in with $30-40 million, investments into these teams. And Overwatch League, which in terms of just general viewership and fanship has done actually quite well, right? They've actually done well, but when you compare it to the numbers that people have invested into the scene, $40 million just to buy in, plus millions of dollars for infrastructure and team, we're currently in the point in the Overwatch League where it averages 50K viewers, and it doesn't really make sense that they invested so much money into that league. And now you have owners, and I can say this as someone who's talked to various teams, some teams want to sell their Overwatch League franchise, but there's no way anyone's going to buy it for even half the price they bought it for. And that's what Riot does not want to happen. They do not want to have a Valorant League, franchise league outside the gate. And if they did, I'm sure they could get 20, 30, 40 owners to pony up millions of dollars to get spots. But we could easily see what happened to Overwatch League, where you invest way too fast, you put so much money into it, and the numbers don't make sense 3 years going, and it makes it a very, very tenuous situation where everyone's losing money and no one really knows how to salvage it. So for League of Legends, Riot's flagship esport, the biggest esport in the world, they lost money and they're still losing money in a lot of regions. China, the LPL, the biggest esports league in the world, is them making money and seeing their actual profits come out. But they've done such a good job of just building over time. And I very much see the similar thing with Valorant, where we will have a year or 2 or 3 of a circuited league with a world championship at the end of it. But I do think if everything makes sense in 2 to 3 years, there will be a franchise league in Valorant.
Yeah, I think to add on to that too, what Riot's doing well in terms of listening to the community, it's because not they don't really only watch like the Ignition series in the big tournaments. They even watch the smaller ones too. Anything that they could put their eyes on as well, they could see like the tier 2, tier 3, even the amateur circuit to see how that gameplay is being developed. So now they have they have the opportunity with the team to think about what the competition is like from a pro level, from an amateur level, and from a casual level too. Because let's face it too, if you try to make a game that's way too difficult for the majority of the player pool to play, then you're going to lose that player pool, and then you're going to lose the interest into the game. And it's always been something very difficult as a game developing company. I could think about, for example, as much Counter-Strike, Rainbow Six than it is for Dota, League of Legends, and now Valorant is, if you're going to cater too much towards one, then it's not going to appeal to the other. So to be able to find that fine balance between both, like Tyler was saying and like Jordan was saying, they listen to the community a lot. And the thing that's good is that they actually have these recurrent news release, right? That they address these issues that the community has, the questions that they have, and keep them involved to say, okay, they're listening to us. We're doing that right now. I mean, just look at the last patch that just came out where the curveball is being thrown 5 miles further than it used to be as a Phoenix Flash. And now the community's talking about it. And then they realize, oh crap, it could have been a bug at that point too. So they realize their mistakes and they address it right away, which is really nice too. It's not brushed under the rugs, and it doesn't keep us guessing the whole time. We're always going to have like a negative perception of the game. So as we continue to have a good communication and good relationship with the developer, the publisher, the game company as Riot, then I think that naturally will grow that player pool. And then hopefully as well, once we get back into LAN, like as Dan was saying, when we were able to get 120,000 viewers for TSM versus Sentinels, imagine that in an arena with the people screaming and shouting when around that third overtime on Haven that DDK and Sean Garris were casting. I think it would have been insane how wild that crowd would be. And I could only it only hypes me up and gets me excited for the LAN circuit. And I hope that it happens soon. And I think once that starts, I think it's only going to be a major success from the get-go. I don't think there's going to be a lot of like, oh, we need to fix this, we need to fix that, because even when you have such a minimal experience with how the Observer UI currently is now, you still have a captivated audience that could still really have fun enjoying the game, enjoying the matchup, and enjoying the competition between two teams.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'm going to add here, because I think you guys all covered the points on this question really well, is the fact that I think Riot are trying to be really smart, and CSGO operates on the free market system. Lots of pros with a free market system. It really promotes a lot of innovation because of all of the competition, the one-upmanship, and that's something that is happening with Valorant, keeping it as an open system. And if you're in a closed system, you lose some of that. And so it seems like what they're shooting for right here is to really find that sweet spot and learn from all of the it's like the Isaac Newton quote, if I've seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. So they're looking to look at all of their competitors and see where they all succeeded and make sure that, as you say, I really love that you guys mentioned the community so much, because if we think about back to all of the most successful esports games, they've all been built on the back of a very strong community involvement. So I think it's going well so far in terms of their approach.
Yeah, so for the purposes of time, I want to ask just one more question and go around. And it's got to do with something that, Tyler actually mentioned, right? It's the fact that, hey, you know what? Obviously, Valorant, super new game, super fledgling state, right? In terms of the competitive scene. And, we've kind of gone through for the last half hour about, potential issues, right? And potential barriers, right, to success that the league might have, or, what might impede it, right? We've mentioned, the MMA issue. We've mentioned trying to get into Asia, right? Trying to, just potential walls, right, to building this global esport that Riot really wants. And so my last question to each and every one of you is, all right, well, what do you think is the biggest barrier, right, to overcome, right, for Valorant to become this global successful esport? And Tyler, I'm going to kick that off to you first.
Sweet. What is the biggest obstacle in the way of Valorant becoming a huge tier 1 esport? This, I think it is Asia, and I think we've talked about how this game should be big in Asia, and it actually has caught on in a few regions. Japan, in particular, has kind of been the surprise hit when it comes to the Valorant esports scene and just in general. The country has really taken on the game, really loved it. Where South Korea is known as the heart of the League of Legends of the world. It's the most popular game in Korea by far. It's been there for the last decade essentially. Half the people who go to internet cafes in South Korea play League of Legends when they are there. It is a global it's a phenomenon in South Korea. So we thought, obviously, Valorant going to South Korea, it's going to be a gigantic hit. It's going to be the biggest thing ever. And so far, it hasn't really set the region on fire. And a lot of that comes down to Vanguard, which is the anti-cheating software that is built into the download of Valorant, which you cannot play the game without. It is an extensive system that makes sure that there is no cheating involved in the game, which is very popular in a lot of other FPS games, CSGO included. And in South Korea, where internet cafes or PC bongs, as they're called, are the heart and the soul of the online gaming scene, a lot of these PC bong owners aren't going to download Vanguard onto their PCs because it's shown that it has slowed down other games, it has affected other games on the computer, which has taken away from a lot of the success that you could see in South Korea. But also China, which is by far the biggest gaming epicenter in the world, where I talked about how there was over 100 million fans watching the League of Legends World Championship final last year. I believe about 80 million of them were from China. China loves esports. It is when we talk about where esports wants to go, China is 3 steps ahead of everyone else. The LPL, which is the Chinese League of Legends pro scene, is essentially the second biggest sport in the country. It is equivalent to the NBA in the United States. They have sponsorships with Mercedes, Doritos, Mountain Dew, McDonald's, pretty much every big sponsor you can think of, they have it. And right now the game isn't launched in China because you have to go through government regulation to get the game through. So for me right now, my thought process is that I do think the game is big already in North America. Going to get bigger in Europe. I think Europe's fine. Brazil, the South American region's loving it. Oceania has also been a very big region when it comes to people downloading the game, searching the game, and playing the game. My thought process and my eye is on Asia, because if they can get Asia, Valorant will become the biggest esport, the biggest FPS esport in the world, because it's something that CSGO was never able to kind of take. But as I said, South Korea and China are both up in the air. They still have to get the game through government, licensing in China for them to actually play it, and then for them actually to latch onto it. And for South Korea, the Vanguard issues have kind of stymied any sort of momentum the game had in the region that loves League of Legends so much. So Asia would be my
pick. I kind of come from. I totally agree with what he's saying too, and that's some interesting points you brought up. I didn't know all that stuff about the PC bongs over there.
Yeah.
I think one. There's a couple for them for sure in developing the scene and where the game expands to. I think one angle I've been thinking about, and a lot of people have been as well, that I talked to, is just keeping balance in the game. I think is definitely an obstacle for them. I think the same reason that they could maybe attract newer, different, more, whatever word you want to use, players than CSGO is because of this exciting, variety of things you can do in the game. But also, you look at something like soccer and it's played on a rectangle with a ball, and it's like a very simple concept. CSGO, a lot of the meta and things that have developed over the years because of the simplicity, a lot of variant comes from creativity in the fact that everything's kind of at this neutral state. There's not a bunch of variety. Everyone has the same utility, etc. So I think, they're planning to, like we mentioned, I don't know the exact number, but I think they're adding like a new agent per act or something along those lines. And, I was never a big MOBA guy, so maybe I just am not as dialed into having a bunch of heroes and whatnot involved. But I think that's a concern for me of, and maybe it won't be as I think about it on the fly. Like maybe people just won't play a lot of the heroes at a pro level or something. But I'm just curious that for me moving forward, how they treat the balance of the game and the abilities and maintaining a certain level of like meta can come from keeping things the same for a little bit of time so that people counter people rather than the game countering people, and that can develop. So that's one angle I've been thinking about. Dan, I think you're muted.
I was muted. I also think that plays off what Jordan just said a little bit, where I think CSGO has done really well with all of that simplicity and how open it is. I think it's benefited massively from the market, and so with and not just the market, but also the ability to have so many different game modes that you can kind of just anyone can make a map, put it on the Steam, and you can download that map and play whatever that game mode is. And I think having a game that is really appealing to you for whatever reason, that Counter-Strike might be appealing to you, but then being able to make it into something that's your own for your own purposes because it has that simple foundation that can be tweaked in many different ways. I think that's super appealing, and it's in CS. It's so amazing to see how all these small communities pop up just for some various different types of movement maps for just mapping in general, trying to make the best map, and community around that, and just seeing how much life there is and how much of the lifeblood is just the people who are playing the game, and that is the game almost, and it feels so present. And so one of the things that I'm wondering, with Riot is how kind of closed off will that be? It's one of the other things there as well that we can start to talk about is trading and the betting and so on. And these are things that do definitely drive people to be more invested in either the outcomes of matches and the game, because maybe they let's say they win skins because of it, or because of just betting in sports is a very big driver of viewership. So depending on how all of these things go with Riot Games, and I don't think it's all that clear at the moment, those could all massively impact what the how much players this game will take on, I think, in the future. So those are big questions for me right now.
On my end, more from a caster's perspective, and the immediate obstacles right now is, of course, the observer UI. At that point, I know from us in this room right here, and everybody watching so far have been prominent in the scene, playing it since the beta, since the game came out. But if you're trying to bring in the person that has never heard about esports before or has never heard about Valorant before, and even as developed as CS:GO is in the UI engine, there's some people that still don't understand how CS is actually played. So right now we're still really into the roots of building this observer UI from Riot, but how are they going to change it or modify it in a sense that it could actually be a little bit easier to understand for the new person coming into the scene or trying to watch it with their kids, for example, as a parent is trying to understand why their kids are playing so many games or playing Valorant for so many hours and what's the inspiration of getting into esports. I think trying to capture that so that people really understand. I think understanding is the biggest thing for me from a parent's perspective, from a business perspective. Everybody tries to know why is Valorant the next big thing, right? Which is why we're having this panel too. But I think the observer is one way to start things off so that you understand the core basics of the game, how to plant the spike, how to execute, and even when you're watching a single player, where is he on that map? What is he trying to do? What is she trying to do? I think would be a good way to start things off in terms of that. And people have been talking about it for the past 3 months about the Observer UI, and still to this day, we're a community that wants it right away, right? We're thirsty, we're hungry for it, and we want it fast. We don't know how fast that's going to be, but hopefully the sooner it comes, it's already going to be in a good step towards the right direction of to where it could evolve more. And I think one more thing, actually, when you're actually looking at developing players too, when you're looking at scouting players, one thing is trying to get the API from the matches and stuff like that too, so we could add it on sites like the Spike, for example, so that we could have um,
Mm.
maybe scouting agents that could see up and coming players and stuff like that too. I think right now we're really into, like, especially in CSGO, it's only recently where, for example, the number one team in the world, arguably Australis, is now rolling in a 6-man, 7-man, 8-man roster. Is it going to get to that into Valorant where we already have that, for example, for LCS and LCK and whatnot? So I think for Valorant, it adds into that, but to know which players we need to bring in, we need that data too. So I think it's something that Riot needs to communicate more with these website or agencies so that we can get and scout those talents.
Mm.
I think I just want to add on to that, the talent thing very quickly. One of the huge issues in esports in general has been, can there be a healthy ecosystem around bringing players up? And that has been really difficult for a variety of reasons. And I don't think it's really been solved. And really, the best way to even discover talent right now is just by having players who have a trained eye spotting them from just scrimming and so on and so forth. But it's generally quite difficult in Counter Strike. It's not like sorry, with NBA where you have scouts going out and seeing like local pickup games and looking for talent. If you look at a game like Counter Strike, it's actually really weird because the way that you see talent has typically been through coming up through these pug systems where you're playing with random people, which doesn't really doesn't really relate to what it is like to play on a professional team. And then people are out for themselves and they're in a team environment, so you're looking at people who are basically the best, with their aim and their mechanics in that sense. And that's how you have to stand out. But that's not promoting good culture within the kind of semi-professional scene, because everyone's trying to like find that ticket to getting that pro contract, and it's generally quite difficult. So that this is a huge issue in CS and other esports as well. All handle it differently, and that's something I think if Riot can solve some of these issues, that can really help the game to have that healthy ecosystem for the professional players and the aspiring professional players to allow for a really budding and very exciting environment, as Vansilli was kind of talking about.
And we've got time for one more. Anyway,
I can add in one.
I mean, I like
an
what
extra
Dan's saying
thing.
a lot. I like what Dan was bringing up a lot about, we talk a lot about esports centric stuff, but a lot of the, fun aspects of the community building for CS was maps and mods and this and that. You don't necessarily need that. I don't think League of Legends necessarily had that. I don't play League, but they didn't necessarily have that stuff. But I think it's a really cool thing for FPS players who want to get, we have the custom server mod and they've built that out so you can practice better. But all the other fun stuff and markets and maybe even trading, allowing people to trade. The skin stuff is fun, and now the whole betting thing is like almost something I'm like scared to even. And I kind of flinch when I talk about after our history with CS:GO. But
Yeah.
it is something. People do like. I mean, people bet between friends probably. Hey man, I think TSM is going to beat Sentinels tonight. I'll buy you a burger if they lose. Like at every stage, people are interested in like waging matches. So I think the more they could play also into the larger audience with things like that, not necessarily just betting, but fantasy or whatever, and getting that integrated through them, that could be a really cool way that we haven't really seen developers nail that from what I've seen.
right. So one last question. I was totally kidding when I said that the last one was last, but but whoever wants to take a crack at this, I've kind of seen it just sort of floating around, right? Speculations about this, right? The moment the game kind of came out, probably because, it's a property of Riot, right? So could this game, right? Could Valorant become the biggest esport in the world? And if so, what kind of a timeline are we looking at? How far out? How many years out?
I can take this one since I've covered League of Legends for the last decade. It comes out of China. It comes out of China. If Valorant somehow, some way became a bigger game in China than League of Legends, Valorant would be the biggest esport in the world. I know that sounds very silly, being like, oh, one country really can't shift the market that much. Yeah, it can. Yeah, actually it can. When 80 million people are tuning in to watch a series of League of Legends, which is 5 times more than every other region combined, it kind of shifts the market. It's the only esports league I know in the world that's profitable, the Chinese League of Legends Pro League. And I've been to China for the League of Legends World Champion in 2017, and it was a madhouse. There are scalpers which are selling tickets to the semifinal match. They were going for over $1,000 to just get into the building. These tickets for a esports match for going for over $1,000. I remember I had a press pass on getting into the arena, and the Riot officials had to tell me to hide it because if anyone saw my badge walking into the arena, someone would come and try to steal it from me. It was that serious of an issue where it is a different level of fanatic like fandom in China than anywhere else when it comes to sports. So my answer to this would: can Valorant become the biggest esport in the world? Would I bet on it? No. But if it's going to happen, it has to start in China, and for it to even have a chance to become a giant, entity in China, it has to get through government law first. The only good thing, and the thing I think that will, eventually have it become a huge game in China, is that it is a Tencent game. Riot is owned by Tencent, which is one of the big, tech superpowers in the world. It is a Chinese company. So sooner rather than later, Valorant will get, approved in China. It will go to the Chinese market, and we'll see if it takes on. I thought it would take on in South Korea. So far, it hasn't. But if it does in China, the sky's the limit. And I think we've already seen so much success in North America, Japan, Brazil, Europe, Oceania, that if China can come in, kind of prop everything up like it does League of Legends, we're looking at a big hit.
All right. And with that, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you guys for joining me on this panel. Enjoy the rest of your ESI Digital, and we'll just see if the sky's really the limit for Valorant.